type of change it is the change we're offering you, but the change is coming, end stop. Is it that
Well, and the point is we can either manage
Yeah.
that change in a positive way or it will happen to us.
Yes.
And that's what we don't want.
Because the elevator, like I said, the elevator is going to break someday, and it's an old elevator built into an old elevator shaft with people who don't repair it with the parts that aren't made anymore, and the entire mechanical downstairs is a horrifying rat's nest of old analog technologies, and it's going to be dealt with. It's either going to be dealt with by the fact that we're only open Tuesdays through Saturdays now, or it's going to be dealt with because we were able to successfully show why it is that we're trying to build a new building and why it is that we're trying to staff it to a level that's appropriate.
Well, I think we have tried to not put this on the basis of giving people all the facts that would sound threatening on our part. Maybe too nice.
Yeah.
I think we've presented such a too nice picture, and the building looks, I keep saying it looks too good. We
Yeah.
take too good a care of it.
There was
Everyone is pleasant, we help everyone, you know? We'll have people like Lisa stand because there is no chair for the next hour, and there would be understanding.
Chivalry here. I want you to know.
Chivalry
Do you
here.
want to trade for the second half?
But I think the reality is, we don't put much emphasis on need.
Yes.
And
All
we
right.
do need a different building. We
Um,
need a different building.
My mother today, she goes to the Y every morning to do the swim classes there, and she heard from a couple of people there that didn't support the referendum and voted no on it, that one of the major reasons was that we had replaced the doors, and if we had money to replace the doors, why don't we have money to replace everything else?
See, I told you guys, you're smarter than everybody else.
It's a logic leap, yes. Vicky?
I'll get myself in trouble because somebody will say I'm insulting them, but I think there's a certain amount of that negative blowback that, especially as we were campaigning, that you hear. There are people who they don't want to say, or they get tired of saying, it's about money or taxes for me. So they pull anything out of the air that they can as an excuse for why I'm against it. It's an excuse mechanism more than it is this is my reason
Oh, no, I'm not
mechanism.
saying
It's
that.
just,
And I'm not saying that that's the key reason, but the
Oh.
subtext that's built into that statement, that you already have the money to do this, and why are you asking me for more money? Like, if you look between the lines of what it is they're actually saying, it does boil down to the money issue.
Right. But I actually do believe that most people, maybe it's just the wonderful crowd I circulate with here in the Plainfield area, but I really think most people do fully understand that the cost of a door is not what is making and breaking this budget and the taxation issue. I think I'm going to say this, or I'm going to talk about something like campaigning yard signs, where that money isn't even library money, for goodness sake.
Because we could have built a new library if we didn't have
Exactly.
signs.
How
Exactly.
many signs do we have left? Could we build it out of signs? That's what I want to know.
It would be an interesting.
I have about 10 in my
Okay,
basement right now.
well, there's a reading room.
It'll be waterproof.
Waterproof, and if you can duct tape it too, it won't break. Duct tape's the best. Duct tape and super glue.
All right.
So I guess my stance is that I would like to see us go to referendum in November, but I would also like to see Plan B, the beginning of Plan B starting as soon as it is feasible.
And that's certainly something that's got to go back to the staff, so that we can
Yes.
really look at that first and see where do we have wiggle room.
Yes, but I do think that is something that we cannot pretend that this is not a real possibility anymore, that this needs to actual on the ground.
Okay.
But I'd also like to see us go for November. I think we've put enough time in this, we have contracts with people that we've worked with, we've got contracts on property that we'd like to purchase. I think it would be, like I said earlier, they say that we're already wasting money anyway, this would be a legitimate, true waste of money.
Okay. Anybody else additional thoughts as we have talked through this about moving forward quickly versus more deliberately?
When you're saying go forward with, when you're saying go to referendum, you're saying to adjust the plan for a Plan B? You're using the Plan B budget as the basis?
I'm saying that we answer those three, we get as many answers to those three questions as we can, and we go for a new building. But Plan B starts here in this building regardless of how we're going forward with the referendum. So we do both at once.
So both an adjusted Plan A.
Yes, an adjusted
I guess.
Plan A. and-
Plan A1.
Yeah. An adjusted plan,
8.1.
an adjusted Plan A
8.
and an actually implemented Plan B.
It still wouldn't you have to ask money at the referendum to even implement Plan B? So are we gonna go to,
Well, I think that's more of the starting to flesh out.
Flesh it out.
Is-
Flesh out.
Am I getting this? To flesh out Plan B, to know what the implications would be and what the costs would be, and begin the austerity
Yes.
measures in
We've already cut out the
budget.
fat, but there's some skin that we could probably trim off and hair before we start getting into actual bone and sinew and organs.
Now I'm not hungry.
So that's basically what it was. And then if the worst case scenario happens in November, that's when we go for your arm or a leg.
Okay.
That's my
I think we have to
Possibility.
be cautious that we don't, certainly involve changes in some of our staff performance areas that we expect, and that somehow would impact on, you know, how much they got paid if we close doors, they wouldn't
Well,
get paid, et
that's-
cetera. That is, I think,
That's a whole nother set of
further down the
Well,
road.
yes.
conversations.
This
Yes.
is the initial implementation where it goes from a bullet point list that we've looked at, that Graham's put together for us. And this starts, how does it that we do this initially and get started on it? And then from there, if in November, something, you know, we hit another headwind, this is what we're gonna do for real. Like this is now the Plainfield Library District, and this is how we're going to best satisfy both the people that come into our library, the staff that we employ to help us come into our library, and
And the building we have to
improve the
maintain.
building this is the building that we have, and this is our building, these are the improvements that need to be made, and this is how we're doing it.
So how do we know how, for the referendum, to cut back on the side, I mean, how we would determine what size?
Well, I think the answers to the three questions that John suggested are really gonna lead us down that path. You know, are we looking at a complete redesign? Are we looking at a modification of what we have already presented? You know, those sorts of questions will lead us towards one of those two options, I believe.
'Cause I think
I mean, if they
yeah.
say we can afford, you know, $10 million, well, okay, then that's not really a modification of the plan, that's a new plan.
Yeah.
If it's something more of a scale reduction, then we can look and see, all right, so what do we do, you know, what areas do we have that we could overlap differently or cut back?
But I think like the key message is that like change is coming for real. Like there's the status quo that ended. So there's options that we're presenting. We want opinions and the public's opinion on what options it is that we take. But the changes, there's no going back to what we were doing before. There are paths forward, but we need guidance from the public at large on how best to take each door as we get to it.
Right.
But that there's no more standing still.
Well, it becomes, are we managing or are we investing,
Yes.
basically?
But we
Pat?
cannot appear to have flipped,
No.
because going from one end to the other would not be a way to respond to all of the people who truly believed in what we presented.
of
It would seem as though we were betraying them.
No, and that's what those three questions are for, to get us prepped for the November.
Those are not only questions for people who voted no, those
Those are
are
questions for
perception
people.
questions about
Exactly.
anyone who is involved and who is interested in how the library is run.
Yes, because
You know,
But
what
we
have you heard about
We
why?
also have data that we need to go back and try to see how to interpret it. From our prior surveys, from,
Okay.
you know, the data that we had obtained. We did a lot of work in trying to get to the place in which this referendum was put on the ballot. And I think we have more information than what maybe we realized that we could integrate and apply to where we go next.
Sure. And I would like to see an overlay of the results that we got from the poll with the actual voting results. Now,
Exactly.
based on what we've kind of seen, they seem to overlay pretty well. Our areas of support were at the margins.
Except for the farthest one up north, those were unexpected.
Right.
Based on our,
Yeah.
really unexpected based on the form that we did.
Yeah. So that's where we need to find
Yeah.
those differences and see if there are any implications of those.
And if there's any way that we could get like a better map, because I looked through that map a couple times as we were going through, and it is just, some of that data, our full size, our county, like our district map, like some of the places just
Yeah.
you know?
Because of the way those are done from the GIS data to the PDF, that's
The best.
just the way it
That's just the
prints
best
out.
that
If
we
you
have.
actually want to get down, you can't use a 24 by 36 printed map to try to get down to the parcel level.
Okay.
It doesn't work. The only way to do that is to actually do that online,
House by
you know,
house.
unless you're actually gonna grid it out,
Yeah.
like, if anybody ever played the census tract map game, that, like we had to do, the last time, never mind. The last time we had to figure out our actual population, and we had to get down to the individual rooftop level. It was quite literally maps spread out over a room this size, all together, the big ones. That would be the kind of thing you would need to do, to be able to get down to that.
Because the GIS, that is,
Make your eyes cross.
yes, it is a slow process. It is, you would think with that there would be a better way to access that data. There would be better spreadsheets available.
Can I ask if there's a place that we can find whether the percentage, or the percentage of registered voters who voted this time, was that significantly higher than what we would have anticipated?
Oh,
Yes.
we had
So,
almost,
I
it
mean,
was almost,
48% for the county.
it was almost 43% district-wide.
Right.
All right, so then the second thought would be that what percentage might be people who never vote in a primary, or not just a primary, who don't vote?
It would be a huge percentage. I don't know the exact
If it's
percentage, but it's
huge, then maybe they haven't even been paying attention. But we had asked a question before about whether we would be in a different position if we raised or lowered the amount
Mhm.
per household.
Right. Right.
And there was no difference.
Correct.
So it wasn't based on that amount. But I don't know, was that a random sampling of the
That was
registered voters? Or was it of those who
There was
voted
some
before
criteria set on
in-
those.
It was a random
Yeah, it was-
sample of regular voters, the
Had
people.
it voted 3 out of 4?
Yeah,
I
three
think?
of the last 4 elections, I believe, was
They
the
voted in.
regular voter
Right.
criteria.
So
So
completely
the
new
people
voters
we
would
may
not
be-
have been polled.
Right, so maybe the people that we're gonna communicate with are in a whole different place,
Potentially.
potentially. I mean, maybe the whole tone with what's happening with elections has something to do with certainly why we all are where we are.
Right.
And
Any
I don't
other-
know what that portends.
I'm sorry, Caps. I wanted to ask John, how important do you think it is, because it went out in all our literature, that there was going to be a 20% decrease in services, that is implemented fairly quickly?
We're going through this right now with the community in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They had a $1.6 million operating levy that failed back in November. And part of their plan B was how do we phase it in. Their first board meeting was very similar to this. I called in. It was, it's not the speed. It's the what's the word I'm looking for? It's the fact of it. I mean, to Jason's point and to Lisa's point about, you guys essentially have Plan A1 now to start considering. And then you've got Plan B, how do we fund that? Like, you don't have the funding to do Plan B. So there's a couple of other assessment steps here. If there's an in the meantime that is honest to the mission of the library and the fiduciary of this board and your capabilities, you gotta implement it, you know? You gotta implement Plan B on an appropriate timeline. I'm not telling you what that is. I'm not as close to the financials as you guys are, and as close to the service, provision of service issues. I mean, yeah, if it's the truth, and Plan B is supposed to be the truth, you guys did months and months and months and months of work on A and B. Yeah.
But we had implemented parts of Plan B with Tier 1, then Tier 2. Now we're looking at
The
Tier.
long range
So
budget
long
plan.
range, we have been all along.
Yeah.
Investing in the building,
Mhm.
which is how we ended up with no reserve funds left.
Mhm.
So I don't believe that in any way
I know.
we have not accurately reported
No.
that this is what we are doing.
I think you guys are on the tops when it comes to exercising your responsibilities. I wouldn't have been with you since November of 2014 if I was at all worried about your, good management of this facility and your good stewardship of your resources. So no, I don't know what the timeline is sitting here, though. I don't want to force it.
But the voters didn't know that they were implementing.
No.
No.
No, I said, I think that in one way we gave them far too much information to digest, and in another maybe we didn't give them the right information in terms of how it was put together, so that we could try to convince someone who might be undecided.
And you can't convince someone who's not asking the question until they're standing there with
Right.
a pen in their hand on voting day. You lose that opportunity. Okay, so what I think I'm hearing is that we need to proceed on kind of a dual track here, with the ideal that if we can get the information together, we might be able to put something on in November. That puts us having to make a decision less than 6 months from now.
And I would say.
August 22nd.
Yeah, and I would say that to do that, we need it needs to be like a substantial amount of information. Like it can't just be people who come into the library, like we really need to get out as much as we can to the stakeholders and people who voted. Like it can't be just the same thing that we did.
No, it's certainly not be passive information gathering. It will have to be active, and it will have to be on all our parts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and if we're going to do the 3 questions, as John has talked about, and to go to those stakeholder groups that we already have identified, we've got a big list of the who's who. The next thing we need is who's going to them to ask that question. Anita's retiring. And Anita's almost gone.
Are you available on a consultant basis?
No.
Spread the word that that's why she left, she's coming to the referendum.
No, actually, Anita stayed longer because of the referendum, and we thank her from the bottom of our hearts for that.
Yes.
Thank
For
you.
the extra months.
Thank you.
We really.
Well, I will say right now that if that is the direction of the board, that I will be an active part of gathering that information. I will also say I know that I cannot do it myself.
I was going to say, I think that we all would not mind having a way to participate as long as we know we can only do that until whatever's the magic date, August.
Wow.
22nd. No,
We'd have to
this,
decide
no,
before
this
that.
No,
would
we're-
be,
we're talking in the
this
next
would
3
be a,
weeks.
Yeah,
yes,
we're
this
talking
would be
before the next board meeting.
Before the next board meeting, everybody gets a piece of the list, and you take your piece, and you go, and you focus, and you don't get off track, and you ask your 3 focused questions, and you say thank you, and you get out. I'm sorry. It's not a place to digress
Right.
and
No.
to try to
No.
educate, it's a place to go and listen.
You go to a group before a meeting starts, and you talk to some people and then you leave, or you get a phone call and you set up a coffee, or you run across somebody where you can have them for 5 minutes and get the questions and get the answers and compile them and get them back.
It's basically an elevator pitch. Elevator pitch, answer. on
Reverse,
there.
it's a reverse
So
elevator.
you're saying you have sort of
All the people that we identified that we said would be decision drivers throughout the district.
It's the community connections list that became the email and the folks who were invited to come to the task force and the citizens groups and all of those. It's that group who were, that we were communicating directly with during the planning process between April and December of last year. And those that we also continued to communicate with during the informational campaign, but had identified as kind of the key groups or members of key groups or specific key stakeholders.
Yeah, I would be willing to help out with that.
Mindy?
I think it would be important, as you're reaching out to members of the community, to make sure that those members actually live in the community and don't just work here.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, it would be super helpful.
John?
I was just gonna suggest, you had mentioned you have 6 months. You don't really have 6 months, not even close, because as you know, there's a lot, and we gotta get bond council to draft an ordinance, like it's gotta get approved, gotta get a ballot, so we have to crunch numbers, what have to do, what they do. So we probably have maybe 3 at the most, maybe 2. Before you decide on, is it plan A or plan B, because then you have to do an education maybe from June till November.
Yeah, no, I mean, this becomes a sprint if we do this. So now, how do people feel?
Similar.
Similar?
Similar.
Okay. Lisa?
I'm willing to put in the legwork.
Okay.
I think Graham's right, we have we have a momentum. Get the information and make decisions. I don't think we should just stop and forget about it in any way, shape, or form.
Crystal?
I have my opinion is maybe to wait a little longer.
Okay.
I really want to get good information. I don't want to rush through this.
No. Absolutely understood. We don't want to miss something.
I don't want to miss something. I really want to gather the right information and really get out there and talk to the groups. I really don't. My personal opinion is
Sure.
I don't
No,
want to
that's-
rush it. I want to get the right
that's what
information
we've got to suss out, so
asking
thank
the
you.
right questions, getting to the right people. Not stopping the momentum, staying on track with the momentum, keeping the process going, but making sure we get the right information.
Okay. Pat? Thoughts?
Well, as much as I hear what you're saying, Crystal, I believe that when you're dealing with human behavior, that probably strike while the iron is still hot in terms of getting the information, because it will be fresher for them. And we don't have to automatically act upon it, but I think we can at least get the information and at the same time, maybe provide some support for the people who worked so hard to help us, rather than having this gap of time. Because I think that they want to see that we appreciate what they've done and that we're not giving up, or that we're not just postponing and delaying. So I think it might serve for, an assist in that form. So I'd be happy to certainly help talk with people, et cetera, and if we can speed that up and get it accomplished, we'll have some answers. Maybe they'd be different answers 3 months from now, and maybe we want to ask them again.
Sure.
I'm not
Something
saying
else.
to stop the process.
Right, no one, just not necessarily push towards November, and I hear that.
Not push it so quickly.
Right.
Well, I know there'll be other problems if we choose other than November. So I think that we can do this in stages. At this point, we will know better if November is realistic, if we gain some of the information that we really need.
Yeah.
And then if it looks like November is still not going to be as positive, even if we don't have the properties, you know, locked in to purchase, et cetera, or whatever, then we'll make that choice later.
Okay, Vicki?
I guess my biggest thing is that little campaign.
Mhm.
How do you get past people that are pushing that? I mean, how do we get those answers from people that have those calls and decided that's why they want to know?
If they are truly voting ideologically on a no new taxes platform, we won't.
Since we already know their answer.
And so if that's their answer, then that conversation is a little shorter. Crystal, I absolutely hear what you're saying. And I think we have to move forward with something. I think where I land right now is we can try for November. And if November doesn't happen, we have April. If we don't try for November, November won't happen. And so if we start down that path, concurrently looking at other things that we can do internally, then capture the momentum that's there, you know, working towards trying to get some responses to see, is it worth aiming for November? And then if it is, then we do it. And if it's not, then we take some extra months, we take a look and see if perhaps we still have some willing partners for another quarter in terms of our properties, and then we move on that plan. But I think that is the consensus that we are at for this evening.
So what I am hearing,
Yes, please.
that the board will move forward with the idea that we're still contemplating a November, we haven't ruled it out, how's it? A
Yes.
November
Right.
Yes.
referendum. To have trustees contact the members of our key stakeholders, groups that are identified, we have a list.
Right.
And ask these 3 questions. Why did you hear it failed? Why do you think it failed? And what would make a difference?
Can I tap in here for just a moment? John, would you also think that it would be helpful to have some general meetings that folks who are not necessarily identified stakeholders could come to? Especially if we were to do those perhaps off-site to try and reach some of those folks where we know we got responses.
Well, you've got several things coming up for National Library Week, which will be before your April meeting.
Yeah, and I'm figuring that we could do a small written version of this that we could hand out, say at that, if people wanted to, you know, just give that feedback.
Yeah.
But then as the board meets, as trustees individually meet with the key stakeholders to be able to give that information back so that we can begin to compile it along the way. Don't save it all till the very end, or
Right.
don't have it all ready for the board meeting. And then at the April board meeting, see what we've got.
Right.
And whether there is a trend or group of trends, is there a theme? Is there something that we can really make a modified Plan A to go on the ballot in November? Or is it gonna be something bigger that's going to take
Right.
too long to meet an August 22nd or sooner deadline?
June 22nd
As
deadline.
John reminds us that we have to get through all of the bits and pieces.
Okay.
And then we'll also have the discussion about Plan B as well at the April meeting.
And we will also have a discussion about Plan B at the April meeting. The department heads and I are already going to be talking about that on Tuesday, and the next year's budget and what kinds of things make sense at this point. One thing that I can say that we had already said that was that if this did not pass, Anita's position will not be refilled as is. What exactly that will look